revaluing big time risers, some fallers, and who we think will be the big waiver winners for 2024. That's what we're talking about on this edition of Stealing Bananas. I'm Ben Gretch. You can find the newsletter at bengretch.substack.com. With me, as always, is Shawn Siegele. You can find all of his great work over at RotoViz. My introduction, my title there, Shawn, was a little clunky because this is kind of going to be a grab bag episode. We got a few different ideas to kick around. Some of it is talking through the valuations of players that have been very popular on the waiver wire. Underdog released their new Resurrection draft, and I know people are starting to do that and or contests, and people are starting to think about rest of season rankings from that perspective. There's a lot of discussion about, who's going to be the big hits. We always think, and there's not always a Kyron Williams, but it's like, who's this year's Kyron? And to some extent, Jordan Mason may have already answered that question, but there are a lot of, it's week 3 and we haven't had a lot of obvious bidding wars, I don't think, on the waiver. Like Jordan Mason was already kind of rostered, and so like after week 1, after week 2, after week 3, we didn't really, I guess you call this week 4 now, we didn't really get the big waiver contests. And the names like this week, Roschon Johnson, Tyler Beatty, a couple of the names that have been intriguing. People want to know if they should drop other players that are really struggling. I got a really interesting Superflex trade question that I want to start with. But first, you're traveling a little bit. How you doing?
Good. I'm coming to you all today from Kansas City, so even more appropriate to have that Chiefs love in there today. Ben, I'm both fired up and distraught about the 2024 season in so many ways. Like every single thing outside of a big thing that we're going to talk about later on the show, but every single thing feels like it has come together.
Mm-hmm.
And then instantly all of those big wins have gotten injured. Now, the good part is that it's mostly not year ending, but even as we begin the show today, we have news that Bucky Irving may not play. Ben, I mean, you and I were kind of battling to see like who could be more ridiculously inappropriately high on Bucky. We did end up getting him on basically all of our teams together because, I mean, that's what happens. You can't win that battle unless, like, the first time you're on the clock that he's in the general vicinity, both people are like, yeah, well, grab him. He's been fantastic. Rashad White has been not great. But now it seems like he has a hamstring injury. I mean, you kind of have to be patient and you have to keep that optimism going. And you got to keep battling through even when you're kind of down about the actual situation. I mean, at a certain point, like if every single person on your bench is injured, I mean, that's also not great for the starting lineup. Your flexibility is getting knocked down a little bit, but you've got to come up with, especially in high stakes leagues where maybe you have different paths, you need points, right? You got to stay alive in the points race, even if you're taking some L's. It's always kind of funny when you go through your teams and see the ones that are 3-0, but middle of the pack in scoring, the ones that are 1-2, but are in second in scoring, those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, you gotta find a path forward to get to the spot where those guys will come back. I mean, hopefully we're going to get Green Bay Packers guys with more value again. You bridge a couple games. You got to kind of work through those disappointments and figure out how you can stay competitive, believing that these players that you've hit on are going to eventually give you both powerful teams and a little bit unique teams.
Yeah, it's so tricky. I think you talked through that so well. It's always a really tough thing to feel good about the team, but the results aren't there. I think for most of my fantasy playing life, that's the way I would have preferred it. I think as I get older, I'd prefer to just have the results in a team I didn't like, because I'd rather just figure out the team that has all the problems that has the results banked, because it's so... I mean, that obviously runs counter to a lot of our draft strategies and things that we talk about, but it is interesting to think through, especially the way the injuries have hit and the things that you think are right and you think they're going to be right. And so you're just kind of waiting, but you don't have the results, and you're like, they're gonna have to come back and they're gonna have to hit meaningfully for me to make up the fact that the results haven't been great in the early going.
And then you don't know if you can play them the first week that they're back. I mean, if Irving does actually have a meaningful hamstring injury, I mean, this could set him back a month in terms of it's not just, getting back out there, but I mean, he was poised to completely take over this backfield and be like a mid-range to high-end RB2. I mean, you have to reprove so much of that once you have an injury.
Yeah, it is frustrating. You said we were battling for that one. You usually win our exuberance battles because you're just more of an optimist. I think in life, I'm always worried about the downside. I think I might have got you on Bucky. Really, it was so funny to look at my underdog exposures at some points where it was like my second highest player was like 30 or 31%. And I am pretty concentrated, and I do have guys that crack the 30% range. But then Bucky would be the number one at like 37. Like it seems like a really far gap to your number one, that much higher than everyone else. Maybe I should slow down on drafting him, and then I would just keep drafting him every single time. It's a high number wherever I wound up on Bucky Irving. I just didn't look at it. And then like you said, in the main events and the high stakes stuff, getting him on every team too, because in managed, like of course you want him on every team. He's going in a range where you can cut and move on fairly easily. He's not the place that we're going to start or even probably spend a lot of time with because we don't know about the health stuff. It's been exciting to see him, obviously. The trade that I was sent, Sean, is a super flex 10-team full PPR. It's a shallow league. And so there's some super flex strategy here that I thought might be interesting for some of our listeners. It's part of the reason I wanted to pull this in. The players involved on both sides are all players that we've talked about that are fun ones to jump into, and particularly how we should be valuing them right now. So I thought that would be fun. I wanted to get your thoughts on this for a few of those different reasons. It says start 9. It doesn't clarify kicker or D, but I assume in super flex that means we're talking 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex and a tight end. And then the super flex in addition to that. So you can start up to 4 receivers. But we're going to make that assumption. 10-team league. That would make sense. This listener was offered Jordan Love and Jaden Reed, this Green Bay stack for Bo Nix and Jamar Chase. Now, he also notes his other QBs are Dak, Tua, Cousins, and Minshew. A lot of starting QBs for a super flex league. Also, not a lot of great production so far. Cousins has been coming on very slow. Tua is obviously on IR. Gardner Minshew, they're talking about potentially benching. But he has Nix now and would be moving ahead to Love. And he basically said, I've got to accept this when he asked it. I got to take the Green Bay stack, right? Like the Jordan Love ceiling. I called Jaden Reed a buy low this week in stealing signals for reasons that you have articulated better than anyone, but particularly because his production so far has been limited by the fact that Jordan Love's been injured. And so we would expect some, circumstantial stuff to get better for him. He's a guy that you talked about on some of our more recent shows as I think you said on the Sunday night show that maybe he would have the potential to go on and be a 300-point scorer this year still, even though he's had the slow start, which is obviously really bullish. I had some people ask me about how to value him after that, and they took your meaning, Sean. They're valuing him as a top 15 player in some respects. So getting your thoughts on exactly how high you should value Reed in a range of outcome sense is something that is important to this discussion. For me, I wrote back, I don't think you have to take this trade in a 10-team league, but that I was also going to bring it up here and get your thoughts because I am really interested in your Superflex strategy thoughts. I think it's a very interesting contextual one. I do think the Love Reed side is sort of the value play, but also to the extent that you can do sort of a zero QB, hybrid or whatever, like I'd say the Frankenstein stuff in Superflex, it can be helpful. And Jamar Chase, I think you still have to value higher than Jaden Reed as a non-QB, an elite non-QB. And Bo Nix is potentially still somebody that could gain more value. And he's another one that we need to talk through as far as where the value is in those things. I know you love Love, and I think Love is better than all of the quarterbacks that this individual has, but he has Dak, And then he's playing either Cousins or Bo Nix right now as the QB2. Tua should play again at some point this year. And then you have Minshew, I guess, as well as just another option. Is the quarterback production good enough on this team that you would still want to hang on to Chase over Jayden Reed? Or do you think it is worth going from Nix up to Jordan Love? Is Jayden Reed that high that you can do that? I mean, there's multiple ways, obviously, to look at this, but how would you break down, obviously, Love, Reed, Nix, players that we were in on in the offseason, have had their values change? I just thought this was a really interesting trade to think through.
It's a fascinating one, and I think a lot of fun, in part because in so many cases, when you have these trade offers, one side is taking on more risk but getting more upside. The other side is maybe taking a more conservative approach but banking probably more reliable points, and the two rosters sort of fit those needs, or at the very least, they fit the kind of risk profile and the tactical objectives of the different managers. Then I don't even know where to go on one where we're talking about Bo Nix on one side, maybe the most fun and undervalued quarterback out there, versus Jayden Reed on the other side. It was fun to see Chase look more like himself. It was exciting that they got him down the field. He was able to beat some defenders. Joe Burrow was able to throw over the top. One of the things I think we do have to keep in mind is that even though they won the game, the Commanders have a defense that is kind of like playing with 10 guys.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of these things that we're seeing through 3 weeks, it's very difficult not to react to what you see. Certainly, you don't want to ignore what you're seeing. We have all of the advanced stats. All of those things are both fascinating, fun, and in many cases, they do give us insights. But one of the things that's difficult to fully pull in is just how different the context is for every team every week. In that when you are playing against elite defenses, I mean, you think about the Broncos for the first couple of weeks, especially relevant here as we're having Bo Nix as part of this trade discussion, where they play Seattle. The Seahawks may end up as one of the more difficult defensive matchups now that they've added one of the best defensive minds in football as their head coach. Week 2, they play the Pittsburgh Steelers. You could see right away in this game between the Steelers and the Chargers, which, we had somebody ask for our thoughts on that game during the Sunday night stream. And we were joking about it a bit because obviously it wasn't very high scoring and I hadn't had a chance to watch that game yet. That was actually a really interesting and fun watch, in part because you got a sense of how two quarterbacks, especially in the first half, obviously you have the Justin Herbert injury. Second half kind of pulls that game apart because the Chargers are no longer competitive from that point. But you see two quarterbacks looking very, very good. At the same time, it's just so blatantly obvious that both of these defenses are also very difficult matchups. They're taking away the run game. They're forcing Justin Fields and Justin Herbert to not make any mistakes, which is basically what they did in the first half. So this was a really high level game, which takes me back to the fact that in week 2, when Bo Nix doesn't score a lot of points on the Steelers, you're like, yeah, I mean, that's basically to be expected. One of the things you and I were kind of talking about before the show was that J.K. Dobbins also looked fantastic in week 3, but in week 3, he was facing the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you have to work through what the matchups are and consider that to an extent, knowing that, again, there are so many wild cards on all of these things. We don't ignore Jamar Chase's breakout game simply because it came against the Commanders, but it does certainly make you wonder how much of that is just complete defensive ineptitude, right?
For sure. I mean, that's a big one, and people talked about it coming into the game, matchup stuff, and I had some, Chase trade questions, buy low questions that were like, is it time to buy low before this game? Like, I think people were expecting that monster game. Still was great to see 100 yards and 2 TDs. But really, I mean, if you look at it, it's like it's 2 go balls down the sideline. They're kind of low probability throw. We talk about those boundary throws are lower probability. You're probably not going to be able to do that against a lot of other defenses. Is really what it comes down to. It's tough. And they hit 2 of them, and he only goes for just over 100 yards in the 2 TDs. And it's like, without those 2 long plays, he didn't really have that great. I mean,
Well, it was very much a mix in that you look at that game and you're like, oh, you got the scoring, and then you look at the targets and you're thinking, I mean, I want a target per route number for Ja'Marr Chase that's much higher, and then I want the ADOT with it, right? In order to have him be what he needs to be, you need a better combination still of the various peripherals, the various elements that demonstrate to us what he actually is for them in their offense currently. The flip side of it is that, from a human perspective, you see him make those plays, you see Joe Burrow make the throws, you see the Cincinnati Bengals look like they maybe had a practice before this game, something that was not necessarily clear in any other game they played this season. And also, again, the human element of it for me, I messaged you late Monday night, maybe after you had gone to bed, that Ja'Marr Chase had managed to basically create a wash with Josh Allen. We were able to hang on one of our big FFPC main events. And you and I think had referenced that league a previous week on the show, talking about how it was perfectly set up, except for the fact that we had taken basically with 1 second on the clock, Ja'Marr Chase over Justin Jefferson. Now, all of these things of such and such versus Justin Jefferson, where they're not obvious, like, I mean, you would still prefer to have CeeDee Lamb, I think. But Justin Jefferson now with the Sam Darnold stuff has been very positive. And yet, even knowing the defensive matchup, I kind of was just back to feeling like, yeah, I mean, I'd be fine with Justin Jefferson on this team. But I do actually still think that Ja'Marr Chase gives us more upside when we think forward, as opposed to simply being like, oh, I mean, Justin Jefferson has been better than expected. He's playing with Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold has been really good. It's like, are you going to get the volume? Is the Minnesota defense going to take a step back, which hopefully they will, to help allow, more volume on the fantasy side? Is Aaron Jones going to stop looking like he's going to score on every play to incentivize, those types of play calls? I mean, Ja'Marr Chase can be a big time scorer the rest of the way. And it's interesting, I think, when you compare his situation with T. Higgins and now, maybe Yosivash versus Jaden Reed, when we did actually get the big Christian Watson play that we had talked about not getting to this point. Certainly Dontavian Wicks is going to be, I mean, he's maybe the clearest person where if he is dropped in your league and you can add him to the back of your roster, I mean, Dontavian Wicks is going to have some big games.
Yep.
And then Romeo Doubs, still most like easiest path to, I don't know, easiest path to anything. He's going to be on the field a lot, right? He's going to occasionally make a play. How do you balance those things, and how do you balance where Jordan Love is coming off of? I mean, they're going to play him, right? But I mean, so much of what he has been too is just, he's not one of these guys who adds a ton of rushing value, and yet his mobility, this larger than life element to his physicality, is a big part of who he is as a QB. If he lacks that, maybe the offense isn't as aggressive. And the aggressiveness of the offense was a question even before he got injured. The efficiency, I don't think, is any question there in Green Bay. But how many plays are they going to run? How many points are they going to score? And this is a lot of fun in terms of working through the trade, because just from a receiver perspective, it's very interesting. You look at the QB side, and I mean, Bo Nix has currently scored more rushing fantasy points than Anthony Richardson. Which I don't think is going to continue. Don't get me wrong. But the fact that it's there is important and does give, especially Superflex managers, another path to scoring, even in down games. And especially when you consider that with their receiver group they have currently and with the schedule that they have, you're not really expecting Bo Nix to put up a bunch of big passing performances as a rookie.
He does have a little bit more mobility than advertised. It's something you talked about since pre-draft, in some of the things to like about his profile, that there is some mobility there, and we've seen that already. Definitely part of this for me when I looked at it was the implication that it's a clear upgrade from Nix to Jordan Love. I mean, it's an upgrade, but there's this potential that Knicks could actually still score in a way that is pretty solid. And that's where I was going, okay, and you have all these other QBs as well. Is your QB scoring good enough as it is? But you really like Jaden Reed. I will note on Reed. Well, a couple of things. You made the comment that you texted me after I was in bed. I was, and I loved seeing it in the morning. And then now, while we're doing the show, I click open that team because you mentioned how fun it is. And all I see is red. We have Jamar Chase with a Q tag. We have Trey McBride with a Q tag. We also have Bowers on this team. We have Tank Dell with a Q tag. We have Bucky Irving with a Q tag. We have Jaden Reed with a Q tag. We have Jordan Addison with a Q tag. We still have Kendra Miller stashed on IR. There's a lot of good players there. There are healthy players too. Rashee Rice on this team, Brock Bowers on this team, Kyron Williams on this team, CJ Stroud. This team has a lot of really good players, Sean. Unfortunately, they're all injured. So it is not working particularly well in our favor. You added Cole Kmet for us on this team as well. Or is this the one where we drafted him really, really late? I'm not sure, but he's our third tight end. We have 3 great tight ends. McBride, Bowers, Kmet. It's probably going to be tight ends 1 through 3 when it's all said and done. So maybe
and
a little bit.
A good time to mention again that we somehow drafted Cole Kmet as tight end 27 in one of these leagues.
Yeah. That was a funny draft the way that worked out. But I gotta hold your feet to the fire. Would you make this trade? If for the listener, I said I think ultimately I would. I think ultimately I would take the Love and Reed side, but I hemmed and hawed my way to it. Do you think the Love and Reed stack, when you already have the Dak, Tua, Cousins, Minshew, stable of QBs and sort of a shallow super flex, do you think that's worth pursuing? Do you think you need the non-QB value? This is a super flex QB value versus non-QB value question that I think you're better at managing than I am. So I'm curious whether you would take this, whether you would prioritize, and whether it's because of that QB versus non-QB value, or it's because of the players involved, specifically Reed and how close he is to Jamar Chase.
I think anytime that you have the QBs that this manager has, then you don't need to make that move. At the same time, anybody who is also interested in this question from a dynasty perspective, I think that part is also fun. I have Jamar Chase still hanging in there at wide receiver 6, which puts him after obviously the 2 stars. But then I had mentioned last week maybe that Malik Neighbors, even before the couple of big games, was up at wide receiver 3. You have then obviously Marvin Harrison after Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he could easily pass him as well. But then Chase fits in there. But it's not that many players later where I get Jaden Reed at wide receiver 14. And I had an interesting conversation with Colin about this on OT this week, in part because he's a huge Green Bay Packers fan. But I was asking him, like, where in my dynasty ranking, specifically my dynasty tiers, which are trade value related, where am I off here? And he thought that perhaps the spot that I was off was not having Jordan Love up in the top tier, basically the big 5, with your Josh Allens, your Jalen Hurts, your Patrick Mahomes, your CJ Stroud. And then the other player that I have there really at QB3 is Jaden Daniels.
3? That's light work.
Again, before the Monday night game. Now, is he number 1 now, Ben? Jaden Daniels number 1?
I think he has to be. I got asked that question for redraft, and I was like, with how bad their defense is, as you were just breaking down, it's him and Josh Allen. I think I'd have him, like, maybe I'd have Lamar there. I think you have to have Hurts behind them. That's redraft. You're talking.
Could we go like on a 4 or 5 week stretch here where the Commanders neither punt nor force a punt?
Certainly the not force a punt thing can happen. So it's a question of whether their offense can keep it up and sustain it. And the way I've been reading it is that he's just really good. I didn't think Cliff Kingsbury's scheme was very good in weeks 1 and 2, and they were still somewhat efficient. And then he schemes up some deep shots, and suddenly Jaden Daniels looks like the most dynamic weapon in the entire NFL. He just looks
is
so
Terry
good.
McLaurin the happiest person currently out there in the NFL?
He's got to be. I think you have to have Daniels as like legitimately in the conversation with Josh Allen for QB1 in fantasy. And not because I'm saying he's as good as Allen or anything, but they're pretty run heavy. A lot of their offense is going through James Cook. You're talking about Daniels is going to be in shootouts. He's going to have to tap into all that dynamism. The only real concern is, they only took like 3 deep shots, actually. He hit on 2 of them. Do they not do that? Do they go back into a shell a little and he doesn't get the vertical passing? But I just don't know how you possibly could. I mean, that would be a crazy decision. But with his mobility and everything else, I mean, he's just really good. He had his highest 8 out of the year by a lot. It was about the same number as his first 2 8-outs combined. He was at like 4.1 and 5.1, and then this week he was 9.2. And with that higher 8-out, he completed 21 of 23 passes. This is what you were saying all offseason about, him versus Anthony Richardson. It's not just the rushing conversation, which we did talk about. I know when I did the projections, I had a bunch of comments about how Daniel's scramble rate was way better. And Richardson, you were really focused on design runs. And this is the profile of a guy who's going to run because he scrambles. And this is the situation you're banking on. And the design runs haven't necessarily been there. And then the second part of it was you constantly saying Daniels is also a better passer. He's just a better passer. We've seen that.
And potentially a better passer than guys like Caleb Williams even. And one of the things is that I really felt like, number one, that you should have Jaden Daniels above Marvin Harrison for Superflex. And then number two, that if he passed the way a lot of the numbers suggest he was going to pass, it was going to be very difficult for Caleb Williams to match him. And that Caleb Williams would have to be a generational player to be worth the same or more than Jaden Daniels. I mean, Caleb Williams, a lot of the passes were way off, and the offense still looks like it's coordinated by people who have no idea what they're doing. But the ball coming out of his hand, basically, I think that we could have a class that does live up to the hype, and that these guys hit in a way that is just absolutely off the charts. So all of that has been very, very fun. I don't think we've actually seen that much of what Jaden Daniels can actually do as a runner. And so, there is still more there. There's still more coming where he's going to put up some crazy, crazy point totals. But working back to kind of this discussion, I think that with what we've seen from the quarterback position, certainly the struggles that we've gotten from Patrick Mahomes and CJ Stroud, you think about what Love was able to do over the second half of last season. You think about how good his receiving core is. You think about what the Packers have been able to do with Malik Willis. Jordan Love probably starts to fit in there in that, you mentioned that it looks like Allen and Daniels got from the group, but does Love start to be very competitive for that number 3 spot, assuming that if he plays compromised from a health perspective, that only lasts for a couple weeks and he becomes more again what he was?
It could be. I think I would still have Lamar 3. I like what we've seen from Lamar. I like when they went run heavy this week, it was Henry and Lamar runs for 80 yards and a TD. And then they've also had, the high pass rate. He's such a good runner. He's a legitimate running back. Like he can, even compared to like Daniels, you said we've just clawed the surface and we'll see what Daniels' real rushing upside is. But the hope is that he can be like Lamar. The way that I would say he's not, and you can already sort of see, is he's just not as physical when he runs. Obviously, he can't be because, and like, it's not like Lamar's really physical, but Daniels is a slighter build, and he's more of a make you miss and run to space, and he does make guys miss. He's very agile. But Lamar's a guy who can actually sort of lower his shoulder a little bit and get a little bit of extra through contact sometimes, in addition to the agility. He's a good runner. Like
he's so good at kind of getting downhill for a player who still is somewhat slender. One of the things that'll be interesting to see is I do think that the Commanders are working with Daniels on like how you would slide, how you get down, how you avoid some of these hits. We don't want you to take a bunch of hits. And he looks very thoughtful when he gets to the second level as a runner, which isn't really what you want. As soon as they are able to balance what they're trying to get him to do with his instincts, I think we're going to see the big plays start to happen. So anyway, that's the kind of enthusiast perspective.
Yeah.
Is that once he works through that, there have been a couple times where it's like, do I slide? Once this guy kind of touches me, do I just go down to make sure I don't take more hits? Or do I just run to daylight? And again, you shouldn't be thinking out there, but if he resolves that, then I think we're going to see some more big plays.
And that's why, yeah, I mean, I would have him ahead of Lamar at this point. And I think, I mean, people are going to be like, what about Hurts? And I mean, the Hurts has got to be in the conversation too. I just think that offense has shown a little bit of concern, and then Barkley's breakout and things are probably not perfect for Hurts. I would still clearly have Hurts in this conversation. But do you think Lamar, I mean, so when you asked me about the Love thing, I guess I would say because of Lamar's rushing and probably Hurts rushing, I would probably have Love in the conversation for 4 or 5, sort of, is where I would land on him, because he is more of a drop back passer. Trying to think of who else would be in that conversation. I'm obviously Stroud and Mahomes, but they haven't necessarily shown difference making for a drop back passer, difference making ceiling, but they would be in that conversation. Certainly, you get into the mass of quarterback play, right, where there's a lot of names that then become viable. Richardson is still in that conversation, I think, eventually, because I think he's going to have a huge game at some point again, right? Like right now, it's easy to be, I've tweeted about it a little bit and talked about it a little bit in the newsletter. It's easy to be, as somebody who was saying QB5 was really optimistic, and he's going to have some of the games like he's had in week 2 and 3. It's easy to be like, look, this is what I was trying to say. But I also think what we saw in week 1, we're going to see again before too long. Now, I think they play the Steelers this weekend, which is probably not a great game for him to have the ceiling game, but he's going to come out. Oh, Kyler is the other name. I knew I was missing one, but Kyler is somebody I would have in the QB5-ish range conversation as well.
And that's probably very justified based on the way QB scoring works. One of my thoughts is just we already have such a strong sense. I mean, again, it's easy to be excited about the things that you thought were going to happen and that they appear to be happening. I was thinking that in addition to Terry McLaurin, the other happiest person in the NFL is Cliff Kingsbury, who is like, this is what Kyler Murray was supposed to be able to do and simply cannot. And so, you kind of go back and forth on that a little bit. The Cardinals offense was very disappointing in week 3 against the Lions after that opening possession. They are going to obviously have some very good games. Yeah, I think in the end, this is a balanced and fun trade. I would probably take multiple ways that you can truly win it, or even as a massive, probably inappropriate Bo Nix fan, I don't think he's probably going to let you win. So you have to win through Jamar Chase if you take that part of the trade. The Packers side, you could win with both guys, and you could potentially win with them in part because of each other up the semifinals, the finals. One of the things that's been kind of interesting, Ben, as we look at our guillotine leagues, is that there were a number of managers who decided to put quarterback and receiver or quarterback and tight end together. As you think through, especially kind of the early going in that format, that's probably not the way to do it, in that, if you increase your ceiling and increase your floor, that, dropping the floor portion aside and say increase the floor, I mean, increase the range of outcomes there. A number of those teams have already been chopped. Now, a lot of that is bad luck related to injuries separately, but certainly if you take an injury to one of your higher picks and then you have the QB and the receiver together and they have a bad game, in part because you don't have that depth due to injury, I mean, it puts you in the situation where even if it's a 16-17 team league, the chop portion can handle. So as we think about these QB wide receiver combinations, mostly it's probably going to be a benefit to you for the semifinals and finals element, but there are situations in which you don't want that. Something to kind of keep thinking through as you look at your various rosters, your various formats, trying to think of what wins there. Then we were able to move along. So we are still alive heading into week 4 of the guillotine.
We are. I'm alive in one of the reader leagues over at Stealing Signals. I am dead in the other one. I was dead in week 1. I don't know if we ever talked about that, but I had the McCaffrey. It's an 18-team league. McCaffrey pick at 101. Kelsey T. Higgins at the 2-3 turn. And this is when Higgins was healthy and then obviously didn't play week 1. And Jordan Addison at the 4-5 turn, and he got hurt during week 1. The other guy at the 4-5 turn, Jameson Williams, was a great pick. Got me like 20 points in week 1, but I ended up getting bounced in week 1 in that one. So one team is down, Shawn, for me. But our Bananas team still alive, still moving, scored well last week despite we had to have Mark Andrews in the lineup because I went out and bid on him. He took a 0. The guy that we probably would have played is Cole Kmet. He got 25.7 on the bench. But no, the team marches on. Aaron Jones and James Cook has been a really nice running back room. You almost wish we had that in one of the mains or something, but it's working very effectively in this 18-team guillotine league.
Yeah, so that's been a lot of fun. We did put in some bids this week. We did not get them. I was a little heartbroken in the overtime league. We're not going to record any more OTs this week because I'm on the road. There will be one that releases on Friday, but because of that, I'm going to mention here that Garrett Wilson got chopped last week. And I did bid, I think, in the low 300s. And Ben, I was the second highest bid. So I don't have Garrett Wilson added to that roster.
I had a team that got both Garrett and Breece Hall chopped, and I bid in the 300s for both and didn't get either, which was a bummer. The rest of that team was not very good. That was on a different. I did a league with my college buddies as well, and that was on that one. But I had the same disappointment of trying to add Garrett, but we have Garrett on our team together, so we got that going for us. But I like your note about the trade that we discussed. You would take the Love and Reed side because it could win two different ways. And I mean, you do get the stack element. And if they hit in the same direction in a correlated way, I mean, we want to typically be trying to. I mean, it doesn't mean you always want to stack. You just mentioned, obviously, in the guillotine, there's other contextual situations where you may not want to. This is one where, if the Reed bet is going to hit, it's going to hit because of Love. If the Love bet's going to hit, in a lot of ways, it's going to probably hit because of Reed. I mean, he could get there without Reed, I guess, to some degree, if the other guys are all breakouts, if Wicks is a hit, if all that other stuff happens. But it is one of these things where they're both valued where they are right now because Love's not been healthy. They haven't had the outcomes yet that you're kind of expecting. Okay, if one of these guys is undervalued right now, the other one is as well. So there's a lot of meat on the bone for them to both work directionally the same way. And yes, you are one team out of, this is a 10-team league, but you're one team out of 10, and you do want to sometimes be considering strategies that give you the potential to vault to first, not just, fourth or something like that. So I like that take. I think that's a key point that, you could be right on either of them or potentially both, as you said, together. The other thing we wanted to talk a little bit about, Sean, you mentioned one of the situations early on in the show, one of the situations that, hasn't gone the way that we expected. A lot of them have kind of gone the way we expected. I think more so than most years that I feel like haven't really been blindsided by a ton of like team level or league level things. And that's been cool. It's not to brag or anything. The other years you've heard us have the conversations that are a little bit more mopey, especially I remember in 2022, it's just like everybody's getting hurt and none of this is going to go the way that it seems like it's going to go. And it's been rough in the early going the last couple of years. After week 1 in 2023, we had a tough time as well. J.K. Dobbins had gotten hurt and Aaron Rodgers had gotten hurt, and it was so clear that was going to negatively impact Garrett Wilson. And then things did kind of go fairly well from there, but it was a tough week 1 last year as well. You mentioned that there's been a lot of injuries. Luckily, they have not been long-term injuries, and the things that we have seen, I think, have all been pretty positive. Like even when you talk about the Jordan Love and Jaden Reed thing, part of the reason the Packer stuff seems so bullish is like, man, Matt LaFleur just looks like a really good coach. Like he's able to get Malik Willis, who we brought in basically at the end of August, get him ready and get a game plan ready that's very successful with those guys. That should be bullish in your mind as far as what it means for Jordan Love and what it means for Jaden Reed and what it means for all those guys. And Reed, one of the notes I wanted to make on him, I had in a signal, I had as a signal in stealing signals this week, is that he had 6 targets and went for -6 air yards. 6 targets, 2 rush attempts, 33% targets per route, which these are all almost entire, like they're all behind the line of scrimmage targets. He also can make the plays downfield. We saw that in week 1, right? We saw the explosive plays. We saw the one that got called back. We saw another downfield catch and run. Once you get Jordan Love back, he has the ability to do that kind of stuff. And it's sort of like the Deebo Samuel role that we've talked about through all these years, where you have the manufactured touch stuff as a base. You also need the air yards and the vertical plays, and then you get this dynamic scoring profile. Reed, for me, the signal here was, look, you built this game plan around Malik Willis and very run-based, and yes, that's maybe going to favor Reed a little bit. You get the Watson shots that you talked about, Sean, but really it's like, man, they did a lot to get the ball in Reed's hands. When we needed to scheme something up, who's the playmaker that we want the ball? It's not like they did some of the touches for Wicks or some of the touches for Dobbs or any of those things. It was like, we're getting Jaden Reed 6 targets at a negative air yard total and 2 rush attempts, 8 touches, so he can go impact the game, because we got to have, our best players impacting the game in this way. He may still get, the routes may not be perfect some weeks because of the rotation, and he's a slot guy and some of that stuff. But I did just want to mention, I thought that was a really bullish element to a non-traditional game plan this week, that they keyed on him. They centered on him. They did that last week as well. 2 rushes and a few targets that were lower air yard targets as well. And then the idea is, well, when Love comes back, you get some of that at least. Probably not as much, because it's not as much of a run game plan, but you get the vertical stuff with it, and you're suddenly talking about a really nice profile. So anyway, that's another one that has looked optimistic and fairly easy to understand, even though it hasn't gone exactly the way we expected because of some injuries. The one that's been really hard to understand, that you referenced earlier and that we wanted to talk a little bit about, is the Denver Broncos backfield. We've been really excited about them. You have Javonte Williams, you have Jaleel McLaughlin. Tyler Beatty is a popular pickup this week. I had some tweets about him today. I got some responses that he's still very low owned in, on some of the sites. Scott Pianowski from Yahoo mentioned to me that he is 2% owned over there. So this is a very, kind of sort of delicate conversation, because it's not necessarily a home league conversation. He's I think it is a home league conversation. He's an interesting flyer. He's an interesting guy to add right now and consider. The other side of the conversation is in some of the higher stakes circles that there were a lot of people that wanted to be bidding on him like he was going to be a big piece going forward. And I was talking to you a little bit about about it before the show, but I've seen some takes that have, essentially put him over even Javonte and Jaleel on his own team, and some of those elements. He looked really good at the end of the game last week. Just to contextualize what Tyler, and I'm calling him Beatty. I know I think his name is Bidet or something, but you said on Sunday night we'll just keep calling him Beatty, I guess. It's hard. I don't know. I gotta get used to the other name, I guess. But prior to this week, he had played 3 offensive snaps and had 1 carry. It was a 16-yard carry late in week 2. In week 3, he got a couple carries earlier in the game, 2 carries earlier in the game. And then in the fourth quarter, when they were up, I called it a blowout. Somebody corrected me that it was a 16-point game, so it was still 2 possessions. It was 23-7. They went to him in the fourth quarter for multiple carries, and he hits for a 43-yard run. He ends up having 7 carries in the fourth quarter across their final 2 drives. Something that's interesting about that is a contextual note is that Sean Payton, throughout most of his career for the Saints, a lot of people know this, some people may not, often used a 3-back rotation that included like a closer. He seemed to prefer a fresh leg player. It was often, I think the first name that really comes to mind for me was Mike Bell. And then you had Chris Ivory for a while. You had Kyrie Robinson. I know Tim Hightower played that role for a period of time, and then at other times was actually running some routes and stuff. Mark Ingram, early in his career, again, I've referenced this before when we talk about the Sean Payton backfields, but early in his career did not catch any passes. He was more of the just hammer, run-only player. And then you go look at about year 4, year 5, and you see how Payton views these roles differently, because that's when all of a sudden Mark Ingram's a 50-catch back, because he's starting to actually play. That's after Pierre Thomas was no longer in the equation, and Ingram's starting to play on pass downs as well, and he's doing both things. But he's often, Sean Payton had a back in his rotation that was run first, and I can more or less, I guess, just say or confirm from, I don't know, my memory, but most of these run-only backs in his systems, well, first of all, most of them were bigger, and Beatty's not a big back. He's sub 200 pounds. But most of them were late-game closer types. He would like to bring them in And it was always annoying for fantasy. I was a Pierre Thomas guy in those years. I had a lot of Pierre Thomas. I was already playing PPR and had a lot of Darren Sproles. And it would drive me nuts that through 3 quarters, these guys would be having a good game. And then, Mike Bell or Mike Bell was maybe even prior to those names, because I think he might have been when they still had like Reggie Bush, but whatever. Kyrie Robinson, whoever it was, would come in and run a bunch of times in the 4th quarter. So I just want to make that note. It's not the only possibility for Tyler Beatty. I do think it's a relevant note that Beatty gets 7 carries in this game. 9 carries in this game. 7 of them come in the 4th quarter. He has a 43-yard run where they opened up a really strong hole. And one of the things, Sean, we talked about with this backfield that's been frustrating is no one's been able to be very successful at all. In Beatty's other 7 carries in this game, 8 carries in this game, he had 9 carries and a 43-yard run. I'm not just trying to pull out that 43-yard run, but it was a well-blocked play. His other 8 carries go for, I think it was 3.5 yards per carry. He had a couple other solid runs, better than what we're seeing from some of the other guys. There's a lot of people that are pointing to the advanced metrics. I would point to it's 3 games. And particularly something that, Sean, we talked about with like Bo Nix and the Broncos and all of that is they started on the road at Mike McDonald in week 1. They started at, and then in week 2, they were at home against the Steelers. You mentioned all of this a little bit ago. Week 3 is a little bit of a different animal because they actually have a successful offensive game, and we still don't get the running back production from the first 2 guys. But the way I wrote that up in Stealing Signals was that it's easy to like then see a trend when you're actually seeing 2 different things. Week 3 is a game where they're successful and the running backs don't really do anything. Weeks 1 and 2, the team is just not successful. Everyone is bad, and it's not like a necessarily. I mean, I understand if you look at the full data that the running backs don't look good. Javonte doesn't look good. Jaleel doesn't look good. The whole offense didn't look good. The passing game didn't look good. All of it looks bad. And so you get one of these things where it's like, okay, the reasons for the things are actually a little bit different in different cases, but it seems like this really clear trend that maybe isn't a clear trend. The other thing about week 3, they had a pass rate over expected plus 10 point something meaningfully shifted toward the pass. They didn't even really try to run a lot. They went very heavy with the Bo Nix attack. And they essentially said, we need to be able to throw the ball. And something else I mentioned in Stealing Signals, I thought that was actually optimistic for the backfield going forward, that they showed on tape an ability to win a game with a really pass-heavy game plan, that it could actually lead to the secondaries having to respect Bo Nix a little bit more as time goes. They're in New York playing the Jets this week. That's going to be a tricky game. They get the Raiders in week 5. I've been telling people to pay attention to week 5 as like, this is a game where we should see the running back score points. But as I was talking to you prior to the show, you mentioned the schedule's got some other issues. They have a Saints game after that, not long after that, which is the Saints are really tough on running backs. And then not long after that, they have a 2-game stretch, which is at the Ravens and at the Chiefs. Now, in between there is another Panthers game. They get the Raiders again. They have the Chargers in there. That's a decent game. There's some opportunities, I think, still. This schedule's been tough. I've been saying it's going to turn. You kind of pointed out to me, it's maybe not going to turn totally, so we have to keep that in mind as well. But let's talk, obviously, about this whole situation. What are your thoughts on it? The Beatty thing, to me, I do think he's an intriguing flyer. I do think also for a sub 200-pound back, he's literally played 16 snaps. So I mentioned he played 3 snaps in week 2. He ended up playing 13 total in week 3. He gets the 9 carries, but it's that role that I was describing, that Kyrie Robinson role. You're out there for 13 snaps and you're rushing 9 times. That's a very specific Sean Payton role. So for him to become the really valuable player in this backfield, I still have to see him play on pass downs. Like some of the people that I was interacting with were talking about how he could wind up maybe as the lead back, what have you, but they're going to do a committee. My concern is, how do we get to where Tyler Beatty is actually projecting for a meaningful role other than just low value touches, right? Just rushing attempts, because the receiving is where it's all at here. There's a lot to unpack there, obviously. I'm very curious your thoughts on it. Just because Sean Payton used a closer running back in the 4th quarter 20 years ago, and that seems to be the way that Beatty got work here, doesn't mean that that's the clear role. Also of note that, again, Beatty did actually get touches earlier in the game. He got one in the 3rd quarter. He got one in the 2nd quarter, got a carry in both of those spots, but basically just came in to get a change of pace carry. wasn't playing on the pass downs, was not running routes. He's a sub 200-pound back. Peyton does care about size, it seems, or it has always seemed, in that lead back role. Javonte has been playing a lot of snaps, has not been good. People are really worried about Javonte, Shawn. I think, you got to have some concern about the efficiency in the ways that he's played, and his value should have fallen. But to me, it's just so clear that if they can get some good running back production on a team level, and he's able to be part of that he has this scenario where he's already the incumbent, playing on pass downs and he's got a nice role. That's the scenario for him. I'm having a harder time visualizing the Beatty scenario where he takes a role that is meaningful. He gets from 16 snaps played right now, even though he's shown some rushing efficiency, to starting running back or meaningful part of the rotation running back. Good profile, right? But somebody that I'm skeptical of. So I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, this one is fascinating because it points in a lot of different directions. The splits that we've gotten historically for the Saints running back group will work for you if the pie is huge. They won't necessarily work if the pie is tiny, and that's what we've gotten so far. And my concern would be, you referenced the schedule. Our strength of schedule streamer has them with a bottom 6 schedule from weeks 4 through 11, which by the time you get out of that, fantasy managers are going to be like, I need to be where I need to be in a playoff race from a positioning perspective. It doesn't help me that much if you're giving me week 12 and further advice. So one of the massive things that I would say that I got wrong about how this was going to manifest is just how much they've used the running backs and how much they've used Nicks. This is the exact same kind of conversation that we started the show with, in that specific matchups, especially when you have a rookie QB and you are trying to establish an identity for your offense, are going to create some dynamics that can be misleading. So I think there's still a possibility that the pie gets much, much larger going forward. But I think the most reasonable take with the information that we now have is that this is going to be a medium to depressingly, but possibly a relatively small pie. And then we get back into this conversation of, well, if it's going to be split, then it just ends up as fantasy disaster. So you had mentioned Pierre Thomas. He's such an interesting guy. You look at 2007, where he was the RB3 for them, and then 2008, 2009, he's the RB1, ahead of Reggie Bush as the RB2 in both of those. But in both of those cases, the RB3 scored 100 points, right? Deuce McAllister in 2008, Mike Bell in 2009. He falls back to the RB2 in 2010. I think there were some injury issues there, but then has a 3 more season run. And this is a decently, actually a 4 more season run, which is a meaningful span for a running back, where he's the RB2 behind Darren Sproles for 2 years, and then the RB1 ahead of him. And in all 3 of those cases, Mark Ingram is the RB3. And so you're thinking about 3 very meaningful names that all get work in that offense. The first 2 of those years, Mark Ingram as the RB3 scores 90 plus points. And then his final year, where he's fantasy relevant with the Saints, you have him as the RB2 behind Mark Ingram. It takes Mark Ingram to year 4 to jump up and be the guy there. When you're looking at a Sean Payton offense, you're looking at all of the high value touches that the running backs get. And then you're hoping that you can have some type of consolidation like we had in many cases during the Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram years together, where those guys are fantasy viable at the same time. Even then, like 2019, you have Latavius Murray filling that Mark Ingram role. And I mean, one of the things that you look at a little bit there is that from 2017 to 2023, you do have a little bit of a decline in the RB3 involvement. And then part of that is just, when you have Alvin Kamara, you're not desperate to get a third guy involved. Now, I say 2023, but this is the year where McLaughlin comes in and scores 100 plus as the number 3 back. My thought when I watch this game, when I think about the players that they have, and I'm considering the fact that Aldric Estime is almost certainly going to be involved at some point in the year, we could very easily be a couple of weeks away from Blake Watson being a $400, $500 bid player in free agency. My concern would be that this offense is going to be designed and the running backs are going to be utilized in the ways that it was when the third running back scored 100 fantasy points. And yet with a medium to medium small pie, in which case, now basically you're just saying none of these guys are playable at all, which is, very sadly, almost the exact opposite of what my thesis was coming in for the year. So I think that is the main concern, is that we're just going to basically get nothing. Now, when you're talking about injuries to players on your teams, when you're talking about the bye weeks about to come up, I mean, one of the things, Ben, you and I have already been, very hard pressed in many cases to find starters with the number of players who were injured. I mean, that's with every team playing. We're about to go through the stretches now where teams have their buys and you've got to find starters when you don't have players who maybe are healthy to you. So even guys that aren't very palatable are fantasy relevant. I'm not saying the guys won't be fantasy relevant, but I guess I do have a lot of concerns now about how this is going to work. But one of the things that you mentioned was simply like when the backs were involved in this game. And that's the thing, again, that is tricky, in that they simply did not use Javonte Williams or Jaleel McLaughlin as runners in this game. The only time they were really involved at all was on the possession when they're down there at the goal line. You and I talked on Sunday night about how frustrating it was that Javonte, like 96% for sure scored, but doesn't get the actual touchdown. And then we get the incredible run from McLaughlin. So when you think about it from that perspective, I mean, you could have a touchdown for the starter. You certainly have like the signature, maybe the signature running back play of the entire season. Certainly one that would be kind of in a top 10 list, I think, for the two main guys. You also have a case here where, at least according to the SIS numbers, Javonte Williams had as many routes in this game as Beatty had snaps, and he does draw the 4 targets. So even though he doesn't have the rushing value that you want, I mean, again, the problem now, though, in terms of how it looks with the individual guys versus the potential for consolidation, you're having a player in Javonte Williams where you really would like to see him, not necessarily as a bruiser, but get back to that thrashing, broken tackle, David Montgomery plus type of style. And then you'd love to have McLaughlin, who they really talked up all the work that he was doing in the passing game, kind of be the Kamara-ish. I mean, certainly not Alvin Kamara peak by any stretch, but that complement. When you're seeing it in some ways almost reversed, that doesn't seem ideal. And then you talk about the intriguing profile at Tyler. One of the things I didn't really make sense was why no one wanted this guy before now, why he wasn't already playing for someone. I mean, this is someone who led the SEC a couple of years ago in all types of numbers. And we think about like what he could eventually get to as a back for the Broncos. I mean, when you play for Missouri and you go over 1,900 yards from scrimmage in 12 games, you have 54 receptions on top of getting almost 1,600 rushing yards. Why do you?
The profiles.
Why are the teams allowing the Denver Broncos to have like every interesting back? Now, you could be like, Sean, you just said none of these guys are interesting and the starters have not done what they need to do, but they've got Watson stashed. They've got Estime currently injured. The Kansas City Chiefs don't have a single running back who should be on an NFL roster, and they're the team trying to win a third consecutive Super Bowl. The roster construction at the running back position for a lot of NFL teams is pretty bizarre right now.
Well, the funny part about that is the Chiefs did say, well, whoever you cut will pick up, and they got Samaje Perine, but unfortunately he's the one that looks old and not as great when he's been out there for the Chiefs so far, and they're not playing him a ton, which is not great. You'd think they would have got him up to speed a little quicker. Chiefs, another backfield that's very interesting right now. They quickly on Tuesday announced that they were going to sign Hunt to the active roster, not just keep him on the practice squad or anything. Like people I think might make a comparison here to Dalvin Cook and how he was brought in very late and he's been not active at any point. Kareem Hunt's going to be active this week. It seems pretty
One
clear.
team has watched their running backs who were terrible and said, we're okay with it. Our aspirations are not particularly high. And the other team said, we're the 2-time defending Super Bowl champions. We've watched our running backs and we're willing to take something, anything else.
We're going to try something. It'll be very fascinating to see how the backfield shakes out. Carson Steele did have a really strong success rate in a high carry role this week. I talked in signals about being a little bit, I'm certainly a little bit intrigued by Kareem Hunt. I think there's the potential. The whole thing we've talked about with the Chiefs backfield a ton for years, Sean, is this like first rule, do no harm mentality. There's a potential that they're just like, he's a veteran. And I know he didn't play in the scheme for lots and lots of years, but we've had success with him before and we can trust him to do the things that he needs to do. And we just don't necessarily feel that way with, I don't think they feel that way with Pirine yet at all. And maybe also Steele, who they kind of mostly just had in a low, although he ran some routes, but they mostly had in a low value touch role.
I think the problem for the Chiefs is just teams are out there begging them to run and saying, you can gain 5 yards of carry on us. You can have whatever success you can have whatever success rate you want. And as long as it takes the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands, and as long as you're not breaking 50 and 60-yard runs, that's the reason why Saquon Barkley has been such a big deal. The numbers for Saquon Barkley after contact and in terms of tackles evaded are basically not there. And yet, when you have a hole and you can take it for 60 yards, it's the reason that Jonathan Taylor had such a big impact on the game in week 3. When there is a hole, you can get through it. You can jump cut 5 yards, and then you can be back to a full speed that's like 20 plus miles per hour in 2 or 3 steps. You make a difference. These other backs, you can have a great success rate in the Chiefs offense. You're still destroying what the Chiefs need to do to gap their opponents and win games. And you're also, again, it's just going to be very low value touches from a fantasy perspective. Carson Steele is kind of fun. I hope it works. I hope he breaks some plays. I don't have enough in fantasy to really actually hope he scores a lot of goal line touchdowns. I don't think those things are impossible by any stretch. But when we think about what teams could potentially accomplish, and that's one of the things too about some of these Broncos backs. You saw a hole and Tyler Beatty ran through it, which is a big deal because not all the teams have that. I think McLaughlin can do it. His play, again, one of the best plays you'll ever see. I think some of their guys behind that can do it. We simultaneously have teams that theoretically have aspirations that don't have anybody on their roster who can do it, and they haven't set up their roster. Even from a deep stashes perspective, to where they would have guys who could come in and do it. It's relevant for reality, but it's also relevant for fantasy because to get the types of plays, again, we've gotten from a Barkley, gotten from a Taylor, that you're going to get from a Jahmyr Gibbs, that you're going to get from an Achane. Now, granted, those guys are priced in that way in most cases, but it matters. And it matters, for Bucky Irving that he can create a big play and the starter can't. On the Chiefs side, Kareem Hunt, again, almost certainly can't do those things. My thought, though, would be that it does give them some flexibility. And then I think he can do what Carson Steele can do and what Samaje Perine can do at the same time.
Right.
And if you combine the roles, then not only, again, does it give them some flexibility from a reality perspective, but the combined roles would be meaningful enough that you could play it in fantasy.
Yeah, he'll be interesting. A lot of great thoughts there, and I got off on the Chiefs tangent, but I do just want to comment on the Broncos again a little bit. The Beatty thing, one of the notes that you made to me, and you've mentioned these other good backs, and when I tweeted about it, I got some responses that were like, I actually want to stash Estime, and you mentioned Blake Watson, and part of the issue is when I talk about Beatty and like, what do you get when you're right and how does he hit, is like what you mentioned to me is like, there's scenarios where those other backs also matter at some point as well, right? And so that's a bigger reason I'm pushing this thing that, like, Beatty has looked good, but I do think, and you talked about this incredible profile, and that is important. I also, like, for people that were salivating on that, I also want to say Jaleel McLaughlin has an incredible profile, and that's why he was super exciting last year and into this offseason. Javonte Williams has had the knee injury, and a lot of people want to believe that he's definitely going to be bad the rest of his career, and that might be true. I don't think if you've watched all of the games and the ways that they've used him that you can be certain of that yet. I don't think he's looked particularly explosive, and I'm not excited about it. I have seen a lot of people that have looked at the advanced numbers and these things, and it's really small sample rushing efficiency in situations where the offense wasn't good. Like I know people could point out that I am already bashing Rashad White, and he was bad all last year, and he's bad so far this year, and I'm saying Bucky Irving's going to take over. Well, he's been bad so far this year in situations where the Bucks offense has been good, and there's been room to run, and Bucky's also hit for runs in those games. In weeks 1 and 2, nobody on Denver was good, including Beatty wasn't playing, but it was Javonte and it was Jaleel McLaughlin were both bad against really tough matchups. And Javonte actually did catch 5 passes for 48 yards in that Pittsburgh game, but nothing on the ground. And again, I don't think he's looked explosive. Of course, he's not looked explosive. He has 24 carries for 52 yards. There's been nothing there. I'm frustrated as well as everybody about the complete lack of rushing efficiency and production. But as you said, Sean, both of Jaleel and Javonte got 2 carries at the 1 yard line last week, first of all, which is not a place where you can get an explosive run. At max, you're getting a 1 yard carry. And they both had 5 carries total in this game. They didn't run the ball. If you go look at the game log, the first series was Bo Nix passes every single snap until they scored a touchdown. He scrambled for a TD. It was 6 straight snaps. The second series, Javonte got a carry for 3 yards, Jaleel for 2, incomplete pass, punt. Third series was after an interception. They were down to the 4 yard line. Javonte gets a 2 yard gain. Jaleel a 1 yard gain. Javonte gets that challenge play that doesn't get the TD. Jaleel gets a 1 yard TD. So it wasn't all from the 1, but it was all from the 4 and in. Next drive starts with a Jaleel run. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight passes. This is where we do actually get a Beatty run in there. And the Beatty fans will point that's a good note. But Javonte had a catch in that stretch. He also has a catch right after the Beatty run twice on this drive. Nix throws the rest of the drive. The next drive is 3 straight passes. And then that's where Javonte fumbled in the second quarter. And people pointed to that as reason that Beatty got more work. The next drive was all passes. The next drive did include, now we're into the second half, includes a Beatty run, but it's a pass, run, pass, punt. The next drive's a lot of runs and includes a lot of passes and a Javonte run, couple more passes and a Jaleel run, more passes, and they kick a field goal. And now we're into the fourth quarter, and this is where Tyler Beatty gets 3 straight carries, and then the next drive gets 4 carries. My point is, if you go look at this game log, there's a lot of passing. There's so much passing compared to the runs. And Beatty got all his carries late. They threw 36 passes, and Nick scrambled a decent amount. He had 9 carries. The 2 lead backs, again, both had 5 rushes, and 4 of those came in that goal line sequence. Of those 10 combined came in that goal line sequence. They were otherwise just kind of mixing in some carries. Beatty did mix in a little bit in that, but he also wasn't playing any snaps. Like these 2 guys were the ones playing the snaps. On Javonte, 52% snap share week 1, 66% in week 2, 51% in week 3. Some people will be like, well, he fell back down to 51%. It's not very strong, et cetera, et cetera. They had more plays in week 3 and also in week 1. His actual snaps, 36, 40, 35. He looks like a dude. It doesn't look like he lost work from the fumble. I want to be clear. Like he fumbled in the second quarter and played in the third quarter a lot. He looks like a dude who's going to play 35 to 40 snaps. If they have a low play volume game, it's going to be a higher snap percentage. If they have a higher play volume game, they'll mix in the other backs a little bit more. That's the way Peyton has also often done it. It's kind of like a cap on how much he kind of feels like they get wear and tear throughout the game. Not like some of the other coaches think that running backs get better throughout the game. He wants them, they want their same running back to be out there the full game and really grinding the defense down, and then they're better late in the game because they've been out there for 80% of the snaps. Peyton has often been on the fresh legs side of things, but he's played Javonte between 35 and 40 snaps each of the 3 games. I recognize he hasn't looked great, but this idea that Javonte Williams, I actually think probably the most likely outcome is we do get a little bit more Beatty in the early parts of the game next week, and that we do get a little bit less Javonte in week 4. I actually think that there's been some conversation that we might see some more Beatty, and he got more playing time late and he looked good, and I think they'll reward that. Part of my point is I don't think it's going to stick at all. I think it'll be a very short-lived thing. We saw it with Jaleel last year. He had 3 games in weeks 4 to 6 that he was used a decent amount, and then it went away. And it wasn't really anything Jaleel was doing. It's just Sean Payton has like a type and he has a way that he wants to do these things. And Javonte is going to be, unless he's completely non-viable, and at which case I would probably think that Estime might be the best bet because he's another back who has some size, but he's going to be in some type of a role. And I don't think what we've seen through 3 games and this small sample rush efficiency and how bad he's looked and his yards per carry are so terrible and his rush grade looks bad on 24 carries in some really tough spots. Again, 5 carries this week, and one of them would have been a touchdown, but was miscalled. You said it was 96% sure. I'm like, yeah, I'd go 99 at least. The idea that 19 carries against the Seahawks and the Steelers, and then 5 more here in the Bucs game. I know I'm just repeating myself. It strikes me as coming from people that already wanted you to believe this offseason that Javonte was a really bad pick because he was so inefficient last year. And I've seen a lot of the stats that are like, since the beginning of last year, he's been bad. Like, okay, fine. But like the play on Javonte was that in year 2 after the knee injury, he would look a little different. And I don't think that 3 games worth of data can definitively say that that's not the case, especially given the matchups, given the way the offense has looked. It looked terrible in 2 of the games. And given the way that it was so pass heavy against Tampa, I'm not going to say they won't be pass heavy going forward. I mean, I actually think that's sort of optimistic, right? Because I think there can be a lot of receptions then for the running backs. And so the guys that are playing on the pass downs are actually the ones that can start to have some value, which was largely Javonte and a little bit of Jaleel, and it wasn't
a
Beatty.
little bit what you're hoping is that all the passing pushes the defense off.
That's the other thing.
Running back targets, which in the first couple games, it seemed like it was an emphasis, and yet those guys are being swarmed because, again, Peyton and Nix and the receivers have to prove that not even you can beat them over the top, but that you can challenge the intermediate levels.
That they have to guard the receivers, right? Wherever
exactly.
the receivers are running, that they have to guard them. And I kind of cut you off there. That was a great point that it opens up the running back receptions, which is, yes, that's definitely a key point. I was also where I thought you were going, and also kind of going to say also that this plus 10% pass rate over expected game where they have an effective game and they win may also help the run game and help the ability for them to establish a run game in the first half of a future game. Maybe not next week against the Jets. I don't think you can look at these games and get such a strong opinion about any of this. Now, I want to be clear because I got a lot of response when I tweeted about this, that for the people that are like, it just seems really uncertain. And I did expect the Broncos backfield to have value, and I think it will still. And Beatty has looked the best, and I just want to grab an uncertain player. That to me is perfectly fine. I didn't have an issue with like small bids. This all started around, some conversations I was having, some of my co-manager situations, some other things where there was a lot of optimism for Beatty, and I was trying to understand it. And then I saw some optimism elsewhere that was putting Beatty ahead of his teammates. I saw in some bids, Beatty was ahead of Roshan Johnson at the last minute last night on one of my co-manager ones. I had to flag and be like, I think the Roshan path is way clearer. And he's another player we wanted to talk about. Didn't really get to because I wanted to talk so much about Tyler Beatty. But Roshan is an intriguing player and somebody that I do see the case for. Broadly, the point I want to make, Sean, is I feel like fantasy managers are getting a lot better at understanding uncertainty. They're getting a lot better at understanding when to make their bets. They don't want to sit on their fab. They're like, we're going to spend, we're going to go after guys. We're going to see what happens. But it does feel to me like every week it's just like a buckshot thing. Like, is this the guy that is the upside guy? I want to bid a ton of fab on him. And it's there. You do need nuance. One of the points you've driven home is the profiles still matter. Like, if the players are good, still matters. Beatty is an intriguing profile. I guess when I say that, I'm thinking a little bit more about last week when people wanted to go really heavy on Steele. And relative to that, I was like, man, to me, he's like a 10 to 20% fab guy. People were betting up to like 50% fab. And I just thought the outcomes that would justify a 50% fab bid on Steele were thin. This week, the Beatty conversation to me, I was like, I think you needed to be 10% or lower, but you can take a flyer on him. There were some people that were a little higher than that. I don't have an issue with people that went out and went sub 10% and got access to uncertainty in the Denver backfield. I will say that there's a lot of nuance because I still think it can hit. I think I can be completely wrong, but there's a lot of nuance that does suggest, like, again, he's played 16 snaps, right? And like a lot of it was in a fourth quarter. And like, how does this sub 200-pound back's profile evolve to where he's actually playing enough, even as the other backs come back? He's playing enough on pass downs and all of those things on this team. And there's already the issue that you mentioned from the top that maybe the most likely scenario actually is that nobody will be good in this backfield. And so, like, how is Beatty the answer that people are getting so excited about as this? To me, it's this if he has these ceiling scenarios that are worth bidding 20% or more on, then everyone does. You're essentially saying that whoever did something. I mean, I get the logic. It's like, okay, efficient runner in backfield where starter was inefficient, gonna ignore other context. He has a chance to override this. The context matters, man. Like the context of who they played, what the offense is, what the scheme is. I don't think that all that stuff matters more than anything, right? And if Beatty's just a superstar, which he may be, you were talking about his profile is like actually really intriguing. I just think there's a really nuanced, sort of delicate conversation, and we're at a point in fantasy where I feel like everybody's trying to make every single intriguing option. And even having said this, Sean, the reason I'm struggling with it so much is you should seek upside, right? Like I actually think the logic is correct. You should be seeking uncertain wide band players and spend your money on the waiver wire and go get guys, but you still have to be discerning about it. That's the part that bothers me. Is like we're not even being discerning. We're just everything is upside. Everything we're just gonna go. We're gonna go get it. We're gonna have it. We're gonna whoever it is. And I don't know. Maybe that's an unfair opinion on my part. But I it's a broader trend. It's not just a Tyler Beatty thing. It's a Carson Steele thing last week. It goes back to the conversations I was trying to have in the offseason around Anthony Richardson. And then when I tried to have those conversations, the response was, I'm out on a super exciting player, and then therefore I'm an idiot. I mean, this is like on like my YouTube channel, some of the comments and stuff at times. And the point was just like at QB5, man, like there's some questions on this profile, and he's gonna have some of these difficult games, and it's just there's upside. There's upside. His profile's upside. He's big and fast, and he's gonna throw a ton, and he's got Shane Steichen, and so there's upside. And so we have to be in on him at any cost. Like we're not even gonna weigh, we all know the fantasy landscape is changing. The costs are changing. The ways that people are playing the game are changing. We're more youth focused, right? Like Marvin Harrison going where he was going was something that we had to grapple with a little bit. And even just Malik Neighbors going around later was a clear play. It was, but there's different prices mean different things. And you still it becomes a case for drafting anyone. Upside. This guy can be a superstar. Meanwhile, a guy that I thought had no upside, Saquon Barkley, is the guy that is, for a lot of people now, the new 101. I mean, so like it is always complicated. It is always delicate. I guess I'm just advocating for a little bit more nuance.
I love it when you get fired up. So much fun to listen to that. Just to throw a few more numbers at people to kind of round out the discussion. And I also want to couch this within the context of being someone who at times, and even still currently, is a little bit skeptical of buying the idea that, evaded tackles are the thing that matters. I'm a big run to daylight guy, and we saw that on the big play from Tyler. He does have 10 carries this season. He doesn't have an evaded tackle by Sports Info Solutions. Javonte has 4 on his 24 carries. McLaughlin 5 on his 18. For Williams, it's mostly broken tackles. For McLaughlin, it's mostly forced missed tackles. That fits with kind of what you would expect from them. Both of those guys have very viable evasion rates on the handful of times that they have gotten chances this year. So again, I think there is a reason to believe that their struggles are overstated. And yet, again, my thesis at this point is that it's going to be very, very tricky. I did want to throw it in terms of how this backfield scores. It's easily been the most disappointing thing for me from a fantasy perspective for the 2024 season. Ben, you were talking about some of the context within the bidding and how one of the things here is just, any dollar that you spend on a player that then doesn't come back to help you. Well, any dollar you spend, you can't spend on someone else. And so we do want to not only be thinking about upside, but have at least some calibration for how likely certain scenarios are to occur. I did think it was interesting. Obviously, very different numbers in terms of the leagues they were available in, but Tyrone Tracy was added for almost the exact same prices as Beatty there. Both of them $57 for the median winning bid, a little bit higher for the average. Tracy went at 283 for the top, Beatty up at 455. That part isn't particularly surprising. As you mentioned, there were some individuals who were very high on Tyler there. And again, I don't have a huge problem with that. Certainly I want to respect the idea that, I mean, if you feel like he can be a difference maker, you should go out and get him. I like that element to it. There's less of a scenario or less of an environment in which we'd expect Tracy to next week have a dramatic difference in what his role was. Mostly in the Giants situation, he looked decent. There were, again, mostly good from Devin Singletary, but some concerns as well. And we've loved Tracy. I think if you had him available in your league and you went to get him, or if you're in a shallower league, which obviously a lot of folks are, including ourselves, then he becomes an interesting choice at the end of your bench, because the other person you would have to release to pick him up is also going to be somewhat interesting. So those guys, I think, fun to compare and contrast a little bit. The other two big names here, again, available in different numbers of leagues. Roschon was added in 946, Emmanuel Wilson added in 243, but those guys also go in vaguely similar ranges and certainly at higher ranges. So Wilson, the median winning bid 129, the average 148. For Roschon, it was up at 191 for the median, and he had a high winning bid of 908. That's another situation where the offensive context could be a big problem, but he might be a much better fit. He's kind of that Zach Charbonnet type of play for you. Certainly, if you're a big believer in Caleb Williams and think that he can, continue to work through the issues they've had and that offense can evolve in a positive way, I think that Roschon, a really fun addition. Ben, you and I on our teams together, we bid kind of in that 105 to 120 range. We were able to get him on our roster. I'm excited that we were able to get him below what the median bid was there. And then Wilson is fascinating because he looked fantastic last week. That's a scenario where maybe you get Marshawn Lloyd back at some point. People I do think are more confident in Josh Jacobs, even though I personally am not. That's one where I think the metrics are actually very compelling when it comes to the weakness for him, even with the contract and how that might work out. We talked obviously at length about the Packers. Whoever ends up as the starter there, if they are able to consolidate a little bit more, and maybe just is a fluke one-off. Maybe it'll be all Josh Jacobs again next week and the rest of the season, and this will look silly. But I loved how he looked. And then the final kind of meaningful name there is Cordero Patterson, who went for about the same price as Tracy and Beatty. I guess for me, and you mentioned the word upside a number of times, that's one where even knowing that he's had some good stretches with Arthur Smith, and I mean, this was a fantastic game from Justin Fields. Maybe not the most exciting game, but from an all-around perspective, I think probably the best game that Justin Fields has played. It does now seem like with another week in that he is almost locked into the starting role for the full season, unless he gets injured. And certainly there's still some implosion risk. But when you look at how hard it's been for Najee Harris and then the injured, limited Jalen Warren to score, that's probably not the way that I would spend my free agent dollars. But I mean, you and I have talked a lot about how just getting some points right now, if you have a lot of injuries, certainly as we go into the bye weeks, there is some argument to be made for relinquishing a few of the stashes that are pretty thin, even if the upside is there, and actually adding some players who are healthy and have a role.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Shawn, we are approaching the hour and a half mark. You have family to visit and hang with. I had enough of my Tyler Beatty rant to tied me over for one show. I don't need to get into any additional topics. Was there anything else you wanted to hit on?
No, other just than to say good luck to everybody. If you're listening to this after Thursday night, we hope you are off to a fast start. Good luck in week 4. Good luck on staying healthy with all of your plays, especially the exciting ones. There's nothing worse than having an exciting play where the player then goes down. We do know injuries are a part of it, but we're also wishing for good results for the actual NFL players themselves. That part, obviously, even more important than fantasy. This has been Stealing Bananas on Shawn Siegele. With me, as always, is Ben Gretch. You can follow at Yards Per Gretch at Stealing Signals, the betting project with Dalton Cates, Stealing Lines. You want to get in there and have your subscription to that as well. You want to make sure that you are subscribed to Ben's YouTube channel, Stealing Signals, and have notifications checked so when he goes live, you know about it. We'd love to have you guys over at RotoViz, the coupon code there, RVRadio 2024 at checkout for 10% off your 1-year subscription. Leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast app. That really helps us with the algorithm and building the shows. If you're watching this on the RotoViz YouTube channel, give us a like, subscribe, all of those fun things as well. It helps a ton. We love you guys. Talk to you soon.